September is Recovery Month, but what the hell is recovery anyway? Welcome to the IGNTD Recovery podcast, a new way forward for anyone looking for answers but feeling left out. If you've been searching for empowerment, triumph, and purpose, you've found them right here. You won't hear the same solutions, and you're not going to have any excuses to fall back on, because IGNTD Recovery allows heroes to rise and become their best selves. I'm Dr. Adi Jaffe, and I can't wait to be your guide on this journey. Are you ready to become an ignited hero? Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the IGNTD Recovery Secrets podcast. My name is Adi Jaffe, and it's like this month is like made for this podcast. September is Recovery Month. A lot of people might not know that. I sure as hell did not. I got to tell you, September didn't used to be a really special month, other maybe than the fact that, I don't know, that it was a few days after my birthday, maybe, or that everybody went back to school, right? Like most of the education I was in was like September was the month you went back. And so, you know, college that was when everybody would report back, et cetera. But especially as my using escalated and when I was using all the time, you know, days melted together into weeks that kind of strung into months, and eventually they put together years. It was kind of all a blur. And I got to tell you, at that time, if you asked me what recovery was, period, let alone what Recovery Month is, and this is the 30th year of Recovery Month, so it definitely existed, I had zero idea about the fact that this thing was a reality. You might be listening right now going, holy crap, I didn't know September was Recovery Month. You know, there's a reason why people set aside a month for certain things in the world, and Recovery Month was created to elevate the conversation about the stigma and the potential amazing outcomes that people can have in recovery. But if you don't know about it, then not only do you not get exposed to those stories, but I think you get to miss a lot of what can be beautiful on the other side of struggles with mental health and addiction. Now, even though I didn't know about it at that time, I ended up finding out about it, right? The rest of my story unfolded, starting with that motorcycle accident and the arrest after that, and then the rehabs and the jail and on and on and on and on and on. And so I learned about recovery, and it became a huge part of my life. I went into recovery, if you will. And, you know, you've heard me talk about this before, so this probably won't come as a shock, but I don't look at recovery the way a lot of other people look at it. For a lot of people, recovery involves abstinence, complete abstinence. I would argue that for a lot of people, if you even say I am in recovery, the expectation is fully that you're 100% sober, unless you slipped up recently. I actually had this experience recently when I was being interviewed for a recovery podcast, and I'm not going to name this woman because I don't want to put her on the spot. But she obviously had not done her research on who I am. And so she goes to interview with me for the podcast. And it's, you know, recovery podcast. I'm not going to name it. But her first question, as soon as it started, was I start people off with, tell us your story and what's your recovery date? And I was like, oh, this is going to be tough because she thinks I'm sober because I'm in recovery and I work in recovery. And so I clarified it right off the bat, and you could just see the shock. We were doing this on a Zoom call, so it's like I could see her face, and you could just see in her face, it was just like this thing where it's just like, oh shit, I don't know what do I do now? But she continued the conversation, and she was stumbling over herself. And the reason I'm taking so much time to talk about this is we still talked about recovery. We still talked about people with addiction issues who then recovered, me included, and clients of mine and the approach, and they just were missing a specific element, and that element was abstinence. And she could not wrap her head around it. It was literally like I had told her that I'm a unicorn who farts rainbows and, you know, throws up gold coins. Like, I think that would be the equivalent in terms of the level of surprise and just inability to comprehend what was going on. Now, I wouldn't have even minded it that much unless it took her like a month to email us back and say, yeah, I don't think I can share that episode with my people. And I want to point out that the only reason she couldn't share the episode with her people was she couldn't wrap her head around how to tell a story of recovery without abstinence. So I got to point out to you, SAMHSA, which is the organization that has Recovery Month, about a decade ago came up with their definition of recovery. And the way they talk about it on their website is it says, in consultation with many stakeholders, SAMHSA has developed a working definition and set of principles for recovery. And recovery is defined as a process of change through which individuals improve their health and wellness, live a self-directed life, and strive to reach their full potential. I'm going to give you a second with that definition. I'm going to let you take a deep breath. What's missing from that definition? Literally the official government definition of recovery. It has no abstinence in it. It doesn't even talk about drug use, people. And yet somehow we've allowed the word recovery to be completely co-opted as meaning abstinence within it. So I completely disagree with the notion. I love SAMHSA's definition, right? It's a process where people improve their life. They live a self-directed life, one by which they have choice and power, not powerlessness. And they strive to reach their full potential. They keep working towards their full potential. I don't think there's a definition that's more aligned with what we do at Ignited. But, while my life still seems like a blur, the reasons are totally different. It's not because days are melting one into the other. It's because in my recovery, my life is so full. There's so much going on that I am, in the past, it was like recovering and falling asleep and waking up and figuring out what I was doing and moving on. Now, my life is full, and it is really, really incredibly powerful what can happen when somebody enters recovery. And I'm going to talk about 3 ways that I see recovery as being very different, kind of following that SAMHSA definition, but moving away from the thing that I think most people think of recovery as, because I really hate how it's been co-opted to mean sobriety or abstinence. There's this movement right now to put down alcohol and to talk about it's like the new version to me of the just say no campaign. Alcohol is bad, don't do it, or drugs are bad, don't do them. I don't think that shit is useful. I don't think it helps anybody. I'm all for people not drinking and not using if that's what they choose, but preaching to people that they shouldn't, I don't know. It becomes a weird place for me. So I'm going to talk today about recovery in 3 different areas of life: physical, mental, and emotional. And I'm going to talk about them more in depth, but I think these are 3 areas where at least my recovery and the recovery of a lot of people that I've seen centers around. And, if I start with the physical aspect of recovery, we just posted a picture. I think we posted that picture, right, Maddie? Is it being posted right now? Okay. Maddie asked me for a picture in this opening of Recovery Month, and we had an episode, and we're starting to prep for this amazing month that we're going to be doing a lot of work on. And I didn't really know what to post first, so I shared a picture of me. It was actually with my dad in the recording studio. Now, the reason I share that is I knew for a fact that if my dad was visiting me in the recording studio, which I think only happened like 2 or 3 times the entire time I owned a recording studio, because my family and I were not talking very often back then I was doing really badly. And so I started looking at the picture, and I was trying to remember what it was like. And I'm sitting at a computer, at like a digital recording studio for music. So I'm sitting at a computer. My dad's standing right next to me. I've got a cigarette in my hand. I was smoking 2 packs a day at the time. I had an ashtray full of other cigarettes. And if you're an ex-drug user, maybe especially a meth user, you can find the signs like there's a butane torch lighter and there's a butane refill. Like, who the hell has a butane refill for their lighter unless you're using hard drugs that require a pipe? But it's all there. But then what I noticed is this look on my face. First of all, at that time, I weighed about 125 pounds. So my body physically was probably at the lowest weight it could be in without requiring hospitalization. My face looks like, my cheeks sort of go into my mouth, like I'm emaciated. And then I have this look on my face of my sister talked about this at the last episode we talked about with her. I kind of look like I'm gonna die. There's not really a better way to describe it. Like, I have no weight on. I look miserable. I'm staring into the camera. I'm kind of even giving the finger with my hands, which I didn't really notice initially when I was looking at it. My physicality fully is showing death, right? Like, and that was a really familiar place for me when I was using. Now, the thing is, physically, to me, it's not even just about your body. It's also about your environment. And so the studio that we were in, I painted it black. I painted with this like exterior vinyl paint. So it had like a black shine to it. But if you look at this picture, and you can go to Instagram to look at the picture, like, we're kind of in this black hole. There's so much shit and crap on the desk that I'm mixing in. It looks kind of exactly the picture you would imagine I'm putting this in air quotes, a meth addict sort of environment would look like. And I bought in hook, line, and sinker, right? Like, I bought the whole way of living, and I was living it. That was actually probably as organized as I was trying to create my environment for my dad, because they were coming to visit. So physicality, your body and your environment are two of the places where I think recovery happens in an incredibly meaningful way for people when they start getting better. And my example is, now my healthy weight is like 155 pounds, like 30 more pounds, right? Compared to 125 pounds, that's almost a 50% increase in weight. It's insane to think about. And my environment, literally, like, I'm sitting in my office right now and the walls are primarily white. Like, the colors around me are primarily happy colors, like yellow and light gray, and pictures hanging out, and, these bright blue, inspirational quotes like, every accomplishment starts with the decision to try. It is like the opposite environment that I'm in. And to me, that is a huge part of what recovery looks like. And I want to tell the story of a woman who I saw when we first had my old treatment center that I co-founded. I'm not going to use her name. I call her Melissa when I talk about her in presentations, because I didn't ask her if I could use her name, so I'm not going to. And, when she came to me, she was broken down physically, and her environment, she had lived essentially in rehabs or sober livings for about 4 to 5 years. She was way overweight when she came to see me. She was down and just low energy the entire time. And she had back pain. She was anxious all the time, which we'll get into the mental and emotional pieces in a moment. But even just the way she looked, right? Her weight, the environment that she lived in, and the low level of energy that she had all the time. Now, I just saw her recently because she came and wanted to talk to me about these job prospects. It's been 5 years since that treatment. Drug addiction, not a problem anymore. Mental health issues, not a problem anymore. She's just such an amazing example of what can happen in recovery. And one of the things that I noticed, which we never talked about when she first came to treatment, was just how differently she looked. The bag she was carrying, the weight she had taken off, the ease and the energy that she had walking around. Recovery is an incredible physical transformation for a lot of people. And I think we don't always talk about that front and center, because while the ingestion of drugs, while taking drugs in is a lot of how we define the addiction, in recovery, what we focus on is some of the things I want to focus on next. And I think we should always pay attention also to the physical changes. Recovery is a huge physical transformation. Next up is the concept of the mental shifts that people experience. And when I talk about mental, I'm talking about cognitive, thinking wise, right? The way you think about the world. And one of the first things, and it goes so well with the physical environment that I lived in, was my viewpoint on life. The way I see the world is literally like a 180 from where it was before. That dark black paint on the walls, that mess was a complete representation of the perspective I had on life. And that was that life is miserable, will always be miserable. Everybody who is not miserable all the time is just pretending, and that we will keep becoming more and more miserable as we move forward. The music I listened to was depressing. The music I made was depressing. The writing I had was depressing. My eye was focused on the misery in the world. I talk a lot about confirmation bias, and I had it left, right, and center. Anywhere I looked At the time, I saw misery because I believed in it. And for those who do work with me now, you know that the shift is ridiculous in turning that around for me. And I obviously part of that is the work that I've done in recovery myself. Part of it is the people that I surround myself with now, right? My wife and friends. But now my viewpoint has focused on shifting that bias towards always looking at the opportunity and the good. And that has been a huge part of my recovery. So, when SAMHSA talks about a process of change where individuals improve their health and wellness, I haven't only improved my health and wellness, that's the physical piece. I've also improved the way I look at the world. When it says live a self-directed life, I now expect power. I expect to be empowered. And that was a huge, huge difference from back in the day. And right along with that, I would say that in my using, in the depths of my addiction, I will call it, the weight of the experiences that I was going through was heavy. Everything was heavy, right? Waking up in the morning, I was inundated with the weight of what had happened before and what was going to come after. Everything that happened was dark and I don't know, heavy. Heavy is the only word that I have to describe it. I don't know if anybody's seen, I'm sure people have seen Back to the Future, when Michael J. Fox keeps using the word heavy, I feel like that's the only word to describe the way things felt mentally at the time. It was like being in a swamp, right? Thinking was hard. Moving forward in my head was hard. Imagining the future was difficult. Everything was really, really weighty. And while I've had for sure my own change in all of those, right? I feel like I now slice through the world. Not every day. There are difficult moments, no doubt, but typically it's like just gliding through life mentally now, definitely compared to the way things used to happen. I want to talk about a person who I think I can share, because we just recorded an episode for her, but one of the people in the Ignited program, her name is Jessica. And we were talking about this the other day because we were talking about her improvement, and mentally the shift for her has been incredible, as in every day, every moment was not only heavy, as I pointed out before, but also full of dread. And while she still has difficult times, no doubt, you can see these openings. You can see these openings where the dread from before has shifted into lightness and hope and expectation that there will be good. And anybody who's listening right now who's still stuck in the middle of trouble knows what I'm talking about. Anybody who has recently started in their recovery remembers what it was like. And anybody who's been there for a while, I want you to remember for a minute how hopeless everything seemed. That's what I mean by the mental part of recovery. Having a viewpoint that there is hope is a huge, huge thing for a lot of people to overcome. That's why September as Recovery Month is so important, because giving people a view into what it feels like days, weeks, months, and years into recovery can help somebody who's struggling right now understand that there is a better way. It's why in the Ignited program, I call our first level of success the seeker level, because initially people are just looking for hope. And I look at that as a mental process. Now, after physicality and the mental aspects of recovery, there's the emotional aspect. That weight that came from my experience, the viewpoint I had in life made me feel drained all the time. I was under chronic stress without really knowing what it meant for years, like literally from the age of about 16, 17 till about 25, 26. And I felt emotionally drained constantly. As I've talked about before, your body responds to chronic stress in the same way that it responds to disease. And so that weight loss was partially because of the drug use, but partially because of the heavy, heavy stress that I was under constantly. And because there was so much shame about the place I was living, I was also isolated. So I was feeling drained all the time, experiencing chronic stress, and isolating all the time because I didn't feel safe sharing who I was. And so emotionally, I had nothing to give. We have this book for our kids about filling other people's buckets. My bucket was on empty for years. And it's insane to think about that now, because I can't even fathom, and I meet people like that all the time because they join our programs or they call me or they send me an email, but I can't fathom living in that place on a regular basis. We just moved into a new house, and Sophie had threw a party for Kai here for his birthday 3 days after we moved. And because it was so difficult getting the house and the stress of that was so great and the move was stressful, I felt drained for about 24 hours around that party because I had nothing left to give. And it reminded me of that place that I was in forever, for years and years and years before. But I hadn't been there, and I can't even tell you how long. Feeling that level of, like, my fuel tank was just literally on the last few drops, and if it kept going, I would just get stuck. Like, that sort of feeling I hadn't had in years and years and years. And to move from a place where you're drained emotionally all the time to a place where you're so filled up that you can give to others is a massive, massive source of joy for me. And I'm going to talk again about a client. I'm not going to say his name. This was a real struggle for me when I was writing out the outline for this episode. But I worked with a incredibly famous celebrity musician. I'll just leave it at that. And the day that I met him, I could tell the level of, there was physical and mental stress, no doubt, but emotionally he was done. And, and that was years into his own struggles. And I remember sitting there in the room with him, and you could just tell he didn't have anything left to give. He was just searching for something to hold on to, somebody else to start filling his own bucket, right? Somebody else to be able to give him something to draw on. He had been touring, I think at that point, for about 4 or 5 years, almost nonstop, like 200, I don't know, it was insane, like 200, 250 days of touring a year, something ridiculous like that. And he was done. He was just done, and I could tell it on his face. And my question to him in the first moment was, when are you going to stop? And I could tell the confusion that took over his face when that became even a possibility. And I see that in other clients now when I work with them. And when you are so drained that you can't fathom another way of living, to me, that is this emotional aspect of recovery, right? Starting to have resources, starting to get fueled up, right? This isn't thinking, it's not mental, it's emotional, it's visceral. Your body is drained and is literally just running on empty, and it's so difficult to move forward. And what I see often in recovery, this is one of the things that actually recovers early for people with the right amount of work, is emotionally they start connecting again to joy and to a place of hope. And, for me, these are the three main components: the physical, the mental, and the emotional. That is what creates recovery. And while abstinence can absolutely be a part of them, it absolutely does not have to be. And it certainly by no means has to start out the process. Because I got to tell you, I now get to mark my recovery all the time in my own life, because I talk about it in experiences like this and like the interview with my sister, and in the work I do with people every single day. I get to mirror my own experience to them and theirs to through my own eyes, so that they can understand the path that is possible for them. And while I didn't understand what recovery was 15, 18 years ago when I started on this road, September gets to be a special month for me, because I, over the last, 8, 9 years, get to take the awareness of my recovery to others to a whole new level. And this September is not only going to be no exception, but we're gonna level it up in a bunch of ways. So we're gonna have details down in the show notes, but we're gonna do some incredible things this month in Ignited to help anybody who needs help around recovery. And one of that is gonna be giveaways. We're gonna give 10 free Ignited Hero No-Hab Reset programs to people, 10 of them. There'll be a whole application process, and you will have to apply. We'll have a link in the show notes. We're also going to reduce the pricing on some of our programs to help people make this month the month that they take action. And then finally, we're even going to do a special workshop at the end of the month. It's going to be really cheap, and it's going to be a comprehensive workshop that I'm going to call "Are You Really an Alcoholic?" I hate that fucking term. You guys know I hate it. I'm going to go through an entire analysis, an anthropological, psychological, historical analysis of the term, where it comes from, what you need to shift to in your understanding of your own struggles and the struggles of other people. It's going to be magical, and there's going to be action steps for people to be able to understand for themselves whether they fit into that category, and if they don't, what they could do instead. The goal for me for September month, the goal for me for Recovery Month is, as always, singular, and it's the same one I've had for over a decade, to help as many people as possible find their way while removing as many obstacles as I possibly can. So this is the episode opening that month up. I urge you, if you know anybody who is struggling right now, share this with them. Let's share this expanded understanding of what recovery means so that we can get more people help. Screenshot this, put it up on Instagram or Facebook or something like that. Tag me, and anybody that you know could use it. And then forward these links to people that you know could benefit from it. Because, my hope is we get to help a few hundreds, maybe even 1,000 people this September alone. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for being part of this recovery process of mine. Love you all so much. See you next week.
Thank you for tuning in to the Ignited Heroes Recovery Podcast. I really hope you found the information here useful, and that we'll see you back here next week. And look, I want to make sure that this podcast is the most useful it can be for you, so please let me know by emailing info@ignited.com if there are any specific topics or questions you'd like to have addressed. As usual, if you like this episode, I would love for you to leave us a 5-star review and rating. Thanks, and see you next week.